James Walker's world had changed in an instant, a single moment, a sudden accident that shattered his body and reshaped his very existence. Once a towering figure in the business world, a man whose name was spoken with reverence in boardrooms and whose presence commanded attention, he now found himself confined to a wheelchair, navigating a reality that felt alien and unyielding. At 52, James had built an empire from nothing, his sharp mind and relentless drive carving pathways to success that few dared to follow. Yet, no amount of money or influence could shield him from the devastating blow that left him physically bound and emotionally adrift. In the solitude of his penthouse, surrounded by luxury that now seemed hollow, James confronted the silence that had replaced the constant hum of activity that once defined his life. The expansive windows framed a city that thrived and moved beneath him, vibrant and unrelenting, a stark contrast to the stillness that filled his days. He had always been a man of action, accustomed to seizing opportunities and shaping his future with unwavering confidence. Now, he grappled with the cruel irony of control lost, the independence he had taken for granted stripped away, replaced by dependence and limitations that gnawed at his sense of self. James's physical wounds were evident: the wheelchair, the scars, the stiffness in his limbs, but it was the invisible injuries that cut deepest. The emotional turmoil, the wrestling with grief and anger, the suffocating weight of vulnerability that he had no defense against. Though surrounded by caregivers and loved ones, he built walls higher than any he had known before. His pride, once a driving force, became a shield behind which he hid his pain, pushing away those who sought to help. The polished veneer of success masked a fragile soul desperate to find footing in a world forever altered. Days blurred into nights, each one a reflection of the last, quiet, isolated, marked by a restless mind trapped between denial and despair. The future that once stretched wide with promise now seemed a narrowing corridor lined with shadows. James wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Who was he without the power to walk, to command, to lead as he once did? Could he find meaning in a life defined not by what he could do but by what he had lost? The answers eluded him, slipping away like mist every time he reached out. Yet, amid the darkness, there flickered the faintest glimmers of something more, a spark of resilience buried deep beneath the layers of grief. In rare moments, when the walls he had built momentarily softened, James caught glimpses of a different path. It was a path not paved with old measures of strength, but with humility, acceptance, and the courage to embrace a new way of being. He began to see that vulnerability was not weakness, but a hidden form of bravery, a bridge that could reconnect him to the world and to himself. His family, though tentative, remained steadfast, their presence a lifeline when he allowed it. Friends, long distanced by his withdrawal, reached out with gentle persistence, reminding him that he was more than his physical state. And within himself, a quiet transformation began to stir, a willingness to confront pain, to grieve without shame, and to imagine a future that included both struggle and hope. The man who had once equated worth with achievement started to recognize the strength in simply surviving, in adapting, and in asking for help. James Walker's journey was no longer just about reclaiming what he had lost, but about discovering who he was beneath the armor. It was a journey marked by setbacks and small victories, by moments of despair and sparks of hope. It challenged every notion he held about control, identity, and what it meant to be truly strong. And as he moved forward, step by tentative step, he began to realize that his greatest challenge and his greatest opportunity was not in fighting the new reality, but in learning to live within it fully, openly, and with grace. This was a story not just of loss, but of renewal. Of a man forced to confront the fragility of life and, in doing so, uncover the deeper resilience of the human spirit. James's story was a testament to the fact that even in the face of profound change, there is room for hope, for growth, and for the rediscovery of meaning. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where vulnerability became strength, isolation gave way to connection, and the future, though uncertain, held the promise of healing and transformation. Lila was a small burst of sunshine in a neighborhood often muted by the weight of daily struggles. At 6 years old, she carried the kind of energy and spirit that could brighten any space she entered. Her skin was the color of rich earth, and her curls bounced freely around her head as she skipped along the cracked sidewalks near her home. She was known among the neighbors for her infectious laughter and playful nature, a beacon of youthful joy in a world that sometimes felt heavy even for the youngest hearts. But beneath her playful demeanor was a quiet courage that not many saw. Lila had learned early that sometimes, courage isn't about loud words or grand gestures, it's about the small acts that ripple quietly but powerfully through the lives of others. And in recent days, her heart had been captured by a figure she watched from a distance, a man named James. James was different from most people Lila saw. He was quiet, often sitting alone on the bench at the park or walking slowly with his eyes cast downward, carrying invisible burdens that weighed heavily on his frame. To Lila, who had known her share of hardship herself, there was a softness in James's solitude, a gentle sadness that made her want to reach out and offer a hand of kindness. She didn't know much about him, but what she did know was enough to spark a desire inside her, a desire to bring a bit of light into his world, just as she often found light in her own small joys. So she decided that she would do something brave. She would approach James and give him a gift she made herself, with love and hope woven into every line and color. One Saturday morning, with the sun casting golden hues over the neighborhood, Lila sat at the kitchen table, her small fingers carefully coloring a drawing. Bright suns, smiling stars, and happy faces filled the page, all bursting with the kind of warmth only a child could create. She folded the drawing gently and slipped it into the pocket of her jacket, feeling her heart flutter with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today was the day she would cross the invisible boundary between observer and friend. As she stepped outside, the world seemed suddenly larger, and the path to the park felt like a journey into the unknown. Her feet barely made a sound on the pavement as she walked, eyes fixed on the bench where James often sat. Her steps were steady, fueled by a determination that surprised even herself. The neighbors glanced her way, some offering warm smiles, others busy with their own mornings, unaware of the small but brave mission unfolding before them. When she reached James, he was seated as usual, his posture slumped, eyes lost in thought. Lila paused for a moment, her chest tight with anticipation. Then, with all the courage she could muster, she stepped forward and held out the drawing with both hands. "I made this for you," she said softly, her voice trembling just a little, but steady enough to carry the truth of her intentions. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. James looked up, startled by the sudden presence of the little girl and the unexpected gift. His eyes scanned the paper, taking in the vibrant colors and the joyful images that seemed to pulse with life. Then, slowly, he looked back at Lila, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, a flicker of warmth softened his features. The heaviness in his eyes lightened, replaced by something tender and unguarded. Lila's heart swelled at the sight, and she smiled, shy but genuine. In that simple exchange, a fragile bridge was built between two souls, a bridge made of kindness, courage, and the unspoken understanding that even the smallest gestures can carry immense power. James reached out and gently took the drawing, his fingers brushing hers, grounding them both in that moment of connection. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough but sincere. "This means more than you know." Lila nodded, feeling a shy pride bloom inside her. She didn't need grand thanks, the warmth she saw in James's eyes was enough. She knew that sometimes, the world could feel cold and lonely, but she also knew that light could be found in the tiniest acts of bravery and kindness. As she turned to leave, James watched her go, clutching the drawing close. Something inside him shifted, a small spark of hope rekindled by the fearless heart of a little girl who saw beyond his sadness and chose to offer friendship. Lila's bravery had broken through the walls he had built around himself, reminding him that even in silence, he was not alone. The neighborhood around them continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the quiet miracle that had just taken place. But for Lila and James, that morning was a turning point, a reminder that courage does not always roar, sometimes, it whispers in the form of a 6-year-old girl's drawing and the simple words, "I made this for you." In the days that followed, Lila often returned to the park, her steps lighter and her smile brighter. James, too, began to show subtle signs of change, his shoulders less burdened, his gaze more open to the world around him. The connection between them, fragile but real, grew with each shared smile and small conversation, weaving a tapestry of hope and healing. Lila's bravery became a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a story told in soft tones among those who understood that the greatest strength often lies in the heart of a child. And in that story, a little girl with curls like springs and a drawing full of suns and stars taught everyone who heard it that sometimes, to change a life, all it takes is the courage to reach out and the belief that a single act of kindness can brighten even the darkest days. Lila's footsteps faltered for a moment as she approached James, a man whose guarded demeanor and haunted eyes told stories she longed to understand. Her heart thudded loudly in her chest, a mix of nervous anticipation and quiet hope swelling inside her. She reached out, intending a gentle touch, not to threaten, not to impose, but to bridge the chasm that years of silence and pain had carved between them. But before her hand could connect, James recoiled as if struck by an invisible blow. "Don't touch me," he barked, his voice sharp and urgent, a reflex born of fear and raw frustration that echoed far beyond the simple words. The suddenness of his rejection knocked the breath from Lila's lungs, yet she did not retreat. Instead, she stood her ground, her eyes steady and unwavering despite the sting of his outburst. James's reaction was a barrier forged from a lifetime of hurt, a fortress built to keep the world and people like Lila at bay. His shout was not directed at her personally, but at the overwhelming vulnerability that contact represented, a vulnerability he was not ready to face. Fear had become his constant companion, whispering warnings to keep distance, to shield himself from the pain of being seen and potentially rejected. The frustration bubbling beneath his harsh words was a simmering mixture of loneliness, helplessness, and a desperate desire to control a world that had often seemed unpredictable and cruel. But Lila, despite her youth, carried within her a strength that surprised even herself. She understood that James's rejection was not a denial of her worth or intentions but a reflection of the battles he fought within. She had faced her own share of rejection and fear, and through those trials, she had learned that connection often required patience, resilience, and the courage to hold space for others' pain. Her presence was an unspoken promise that she would not be deterred by a moment of anger or fear, that she would not shrink away from the challenge of breaking through the walls James had erected around his heart. She saw beyond the shout to the trembling man beneath, and rather than stepping back, she took a small, careful step forward, signaling her willingness to stay, to wait, and to understand. The charged silence that followed was thick with emotion, a fragile pause in which both stood vulnerable in their own ways. Lila's steady gaze offered a lifeline in the turbulent sea of James's fear, and though he could not yet reach out to take it, he could no longer deny its presence. The moment was raw and honest, a painful but necessary beginning to a story neither of them could yet fully grasp. It was the kind of moment that speaks to the complexities of human connection, how fear can masquerade as anger, how rejection can mask a desperate plea for safety, and how strength often hides beneath the surface of apparent fragility. Lila's refusal to back down was an act of quiet defiance against isolation, a testament to the power of empathy and the belief that healing starts with being seen and accepted even when it feels impossible. The confrontation did not end in reconciliation that day. James remained closed off, his defenses intact, but it marked the first crack in the armor, the initial spark of possibility in a long journey toward trust. For Lila, the experience deepened her resolve, teaching her that connection is not won in a single moment but nurtured through patience, kindness, and unwavering presence. She understood that true strength lies not in forcing change but in standing firm enough to let change come when the other is ready. In the days and weeks that followed, the memory of James's rejection and her own response became a quiet foundation on which they could slowly begin to build. It was a story of fear met with courage, of silence met with persistence, and of two souls inching toward understanding despite the barriers between them. Their encounter captured a universal truth about human relationships, that the hardest walls to break down are often those built by pride and pain, and that the greatest acts of bravery sometimes come not in grand gestures, but in the simple refusal to walk away. In the stillness after the storm of emotions, Lila carried with her a hope that transcended the moment, a hope that love and connection could be forged in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes, the path to healing begins with the courage to face rejection without turning away. James, too, carried the encounter with him, a seed of uncertainty planted in his heart, challenging the fears that had long kept him apart from others. Though he could not yet voice it, something within him began to stir, a faint awareness that maybe, just maybe, trust and connection were worth the risk of breaking through his walls. Their story was far from over, but in that initial, painful rejection, a fragile thread was spun, a thread woven from fear, strength, and the quiet hope that even the deepest wounds can one day heal. The community center, nestled on the corner of a tired neighborhood street, was a quiet refuge from the harshness outside. Its peeling paint and creaky floorboards held stories of countless afternoons spent bridging gaps between people who longed to be seen and understood. On this particular afternoon, the fading sunlight poured gently through a cracked window, casting a soft glow over the worn wooden table where two very different souls sat facing one another. Lila was a small, gentle presence. Her hands, still delicate and unpracticed, held a single sheet of paper crumpled slightly at the edges, but vibrant with the life of her imagination. Her eyes, wide and bright, held something rare, a pure, unshaken hope. She took a deep breath, then extended the drawing toward James, who sat stiffly on the other side of the table. His eyes, usually cold and watchful, darted between the paper and the child's face. Years of pain, disappointment, and hard lessons had carved deep lines into his features, and his posture was tense, an invisible barrier between him and the world. The drawing was simple yet profound. At its center was a figure seated in a wheelchair. The figure was under a large umbrella, painted with bold, protective strokes of blue and green. Beside the figure stood a child, beaming with an open-hearted smile, their hand outstretched as if offering both shelter and companionship. The umbrella arched over them like a shield, a symbol not only of protection from the rain but from the harsh storms life often unleashed. Around them, soft, colorful strokes suggested a world that, while imperfect, held the promise of safety and care. Lila's voice was soft but steady when she spoke. "This is someone who needs help. And this is a friend, someone who stays, who cares. The umbrella is there to keep them safe when it's hard outside." James's eyes lingered on the drawing. It wasn't the bright colors or the innocence of the child that caught him, it was the quiet strength beneath it all. The figure in the wheelchair was not portrayed as weak or pitiful, but as someone worthy of protection and respect. The child wasn't just kind, they were brave enough to stand beside someone vulnerable, not away from them. For years, James had built walls around his heart, walls forged from disappointment and hardened by the harsh realities he'd faced. He had learned to see vulnerability as weakness and kindness as a luxury the world couldn't afford. But looking at Lila's drawing, he felt those walls begin to crack. He saw the reflection of something he'd long forgotten, empathy unburdened by bitterness, the simple truth that caring for one another wasn't just an ideal, but a necessity. Lila watched him carefully, sensing the subtle change. She had drawn this picture not just as a school assignment, but as a message a bridge offered to a man who had stopped believing in bridges. James's gaze softened, and for a moment, the years of guarded silence gave way to something new, something fragile and beautiful. "Why did you draw this?" he asked quietly, his voice rough but curious. Lila smiled shyly. "Because sometimes it feels like no one notices the people who need help the most. But if we stand with them, if we show we care, maybe things won't feel so scary." Her words hung in the air, simple but profound. They stirred memories in James of times he had felt invisible, cast aside, fighting his own battles alone. He remembered the loneliness, the fear. And now, looking into Lila's eyes, he saw a chance for something different. A chance to believe again. In that moment, the community center felt warmer. The cracked walls and worn floors didn't seem quite so heavy. Between them, a quiet understanding blossomed, a reminder that hope could be drawn, shared, and passed on, like a gentle umbrella shielding against the storm. James reached out, carefully taking the drawing into his hands. He studied it once more, tracing the child's outstretched hand with his finger. "Thank you, Lila," he said, his voice softer now, edged with something like gratitude. "I think I needed to see this more than I realized." Lila beamed, her smile lighting up the room. For her, this was more than just a drawing, it was a promise, a seed planted in the soil of someone's heart, with the hope that it would grow into something strong and unbreakable. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, James sat back, a subtle change rippling through him. The hardened exterior he'd worn for so long had begun to give way to something tender and real. In the innocence and empathy of a child's eyes, he found a glimpse of a future he thought he'd lost, a future where care could conquer isolation, and hope could take root even in the toughest places. The drawing wasn't just a picture on a page. It was a story of resilience, of connection, and above all, of the quiet, powerful courage it takes to stand beside someone in need. And for James, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where hope wasn't just a word, but a living, breathing reality. James sat on the weathered wooden bench in the corner of the quiet park, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the rough surface. The world around him was alive, the distant laughter of children playing, the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, and the occasional bark of a dog chasing a ball. Yet, none of it reached him. For years, James had lived as though behind a thick glass wall, detached and guarded, his heart encased in a fortress built from pain, disappointment, and hardened bitterness. He wasn't always this way. There had been a time when laughter came easily, when trust was natural and hope was a light that guided him forward. But life, with its relentless hardships and betrayals, had chipped away at that light, leaving behind only shadows. The wounds ran deep, and James had chosen to armor himself, convinced that vulnerability was a luxury he could no longer afford. The bitterness became his shield, his silent companion. It whispered that people would hurt him if he let them in. That love and kindness were dangerous tools that could be wielded against him in the wrong hands. So he stayed closed off, isolated in his own world of cynicism. Then came Lila. She was different from anyone James had ever known. Her kindness wasn't loud or desperate, it was quiet, persistent, and genuine. She didn't demand his trust or affection, nor did she flinch in the face of his cold distance. Instead, she offered something rare: patience. A steady presence that didn't waver when he pushed her away, a courage that met his walls not with force, but with gentle persistence. It was in the small moments: her soft smile when he avoided eye contact, her unwavering gaze when he spoke in clipped tones, her simple acts of kindness like bringing him coffee or sitting quietly beside him, that Lila's influence took root. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't pretend to understand his pain fully. She just accepted him, flaws and all, and slowly, that acceptance began to chip away at the ice around his heart. Tonight, as James sat beneath the sprawling branches of the oak tree, memories of their conversations flooded his mind. Lila's voice, calm and warm, echoing in his ears as she spoke of forgiveness not as a gift for others, but as a release for oneself. He remembered her courage, not just in facing her own fears, but in daring to hope for something better for both of them. The struggle inside him was fierce. The bitterness, so familiar and comforting in its own way, fought hard to keep him safe. He wrestled with the urge to retreat further into his shell, to dismiss Lila's kindness as naive or fleeting. But beneath that defensive anger was a growing ache, a yearning for connection, for healing, for the possibility of trust. James closed his eyes, trying to quiet the storm within. He could almost feel the walls trembling, the cracks spreading where light seeped through. It was terrifying. To open himself meant risking the pain he had worked so hard to avoid. What if the wounds reopened? What if forgiveness left him vulnerable, exposed to disappointment once more? Yet, there was another voice, a softer, more hopeful one, that whispered in the depths of his heart. It spoke of healing, of human connection's quiet power to mend what bitterness had broken. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It was about freeing himself from its heavy chains, about choosing to let go so that he might breathe again. He thought of Lila, her unwavering faith in the goodness that still existed in the world, even when it was hard to see. She had shown him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. That kindness wasn't weakness, but strength. The tension in James's chest loosened just a little. He wasn't ready to tear down every wall or to fully trust again. But maybe, he could begin with small steps. Maybe he could allow himself to be touched by kindness, to entertain the idea that healing was possible. As the sky darkened and stars began to flicker overhead, James opened his eyes and looked out across the park. The world was still moving forward, filled with life and light, and maybe, just maybe, there was room in it for him, too. He rose from the bench, a quiet resolve settling in his heart. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The path toward forgiveness and connection was winding and uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, James felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but real promise that the walls he built to protect himself could someday be replaced by bridges, strong enough to carry the weight of healing. And with that thought, he took his first step. James had lived much of his life behind walls not made of bricks or mortar, but of silence, solitude, and an unyielding resolve to keep his pain locked away from the world. The years had shaped him into a man who wore toughness like armor, his guarded demeanor a shield against the vulnerability that once had left him exposed and broken. He believed that showing weakness was dangerous, a crack in his fortress that could let in more hurt than he could bear. So, he kept people at arm's length, wrapped in the cold comfort of isolation, convinced that this was the only way to survive. Into this carefully constructed solitude came Lila, a presence so quiet, so unassuming, that at first, James barely noticed her. She didn't try to break down his walls with force or demands, but rather approached with the gentle patience of someone who understood that healing could not be rushed. Lila's kindness was not loud or flashy, it was a steady, soft light, like the dawn slowly dissolving the night's darkness. She sat beside him in silence, listened without judgment, and offered small acts of care that spoke louder than words. Her presence was a balm for wounds James had long forgotten how to acknowledge. At first, James resisted. His instincts told him to recoil, to retreat deeper into his fortress, fearful that opening even a sliver of himself to another would mean losing control, becoming vulnerable to heartbreak again. Yet, Lila never pressed. She simply remained, unwavering and patient. Her eyes held no pity, only quiet understanding, a recognition that beneath James's hardened exterior lay a man who had been hurt and was learning, slowly, how to trust again. The change came not in a dramatic moment, but in the small, almost imperceptible ways. James found himself sharing a smile, allowing a brief glance, or sitting with Lila in silence without the familiar urge to push her away. These moments, seemingly insignificant, became the threads weaving a new kind of bond, a connection built on mutual respect, empathy, and the willingness to be present for one another. Through Lila, James began to realize that vulnerability was not the weakness he had feared, but a hidden strength, the courage to show up as he was, flaws and all, and to let someone else witness his struggles without judgment. Slowly, the walls that had once seemed impenetrable began to crack. James started to speak of his past, not in grand declarations, but in quiet conversations that carried the weight of years spent carrying burdens alone. He spoke of loss, of mistakes, and of the long road that had brought him to this point. And Lila listened not as someone waiting to offer solutions, but as a companion who honored his story and walked alongside him without rushing or forcing change. In this new openness, James found hope, a fragile, shining thing that he hadn't dared to believe in for a long time. The bond between him and Lila grew stronger, becoming a beacon in the dark spaces of his heart. Their connection was a testament to the power of human kindness and the transformative potential of empathy. James learned that strength wasn't about standing alone on a high, unreachable peak, but about holding out a hand and letting someone take it, about sharing the load instead of bearing it all in silence. Through their growing relationship, James discovered that vulnerability was a form of bravery, an act of trust that could heal wounds deeper than any armor ever could. It was in allowing himself to be seen, truly seen, that he began to shed the weight of his loneliness and fear. Lila's presence reminded him that no one is meant to face life's challenges alone, and that sometimes, the greatest strength comes from opening your heart and letting another soul in. Their story became more than just a personal journey, it was a reflection of a universal truth. In a world that often prizes stoicism and self-reliance, James and Lila's bond showed that true courage lies in connection, in the willingness to be vulnerable, and in the beauty of shared humanity. Together, they illuminated the path from isolation to intimacy, from fear to hope, and from survival to living fully. James's new beginning was not a sudden transformation but a gradual unfolding, a slow learning to trust, to feel, and to embrace the imperfect, messy, beautiful complexity of life and relationships. Lila's steady support gave him the strength to face his fears and let go of the false notion that vulnerability was something to hide. In her presence, he found the freedom to be himself, to express pain and joy alike, and to believe in the possibility of healing. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, James's life shifted in ways he hadn't imagined possible. The fortress he had built around his heart didn't vanish overnight, but it softened. There were still moments of doubt and fear, but they no longer ruled him. Instead, they became part of a larger story, one of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of love and empathy. And in that story, James and Lila walked forward together, their bond a shining example that vulnerability is not the end of strength, but its true beginning. It was a new chapter, one filled with promise and the quiet joy of knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it not alone, but side by side. Lila and James came from different worlds, their lives marked by very different experiences, yet fate brought them together at a crossroads where fear, hope, and healing intertwined. James was a man who carried the weight of his past like an invisible chain. Years of regret clung to him, a life punctuated by lost opportunities, mistakes he couldn't undo, and fears that held him hostage. Each day felt like a quiet battle, even simple moments were clouded by the shadows of what could have been. His heart, once full of dreams, had grown cautious, guarded against disappointment. Opening up to anyone seemed impossible, a risk he wasn't willing to take. So, he lived behind walls of silence, his emotions carefully hidden beneath a calm exterior. Lila, on the other hand, was young and innocent, not in the sense of being naive, but with a natural kindness and purity that illuminated everything around her. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and hope, untouched by the harshness James knew all too well. She viewed the world through a lens of possibility, finding joy in the little things that many overlook, the song of a bird, the way sunlight filters through leaves, the warmth of a genuine smile. Their meeting was quiet and unremarkable at first, but it was the kind of moment that lingers in the soul. A shared smile, a few exchanged words, they didn't realize then how much their lives would change. James found himself slowly lowering the walls he had built so high. Lila's presence was like a gentle light in the dark, a light that invited him to share pieces of himself he thought he'd buried forever. He spoke haltingly at first, revealing fragments of his fears, the pain of failure, the weight of regret, the loneliness that gnawed at him. His voice often wavered, but Lila listened with patience and compassion, never rushing, never judging. Through these conversations, James began to see that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was a bridge, a way to connect, to heal, to grow. And Lila's innocence didn't make her ignorant of hardship, instead, it gave her a powerful empathy, a fresh perspective that reminded James of life's simple joys and the possibility of new beginnings. Lila, too, faced her own fears and uncertainties. Though she appeared carefree, she wrestled silently with worries about the future, whether she was strong enough to meet her dreams, whether she could overcome the challenges ahead. James became her confidant, her anchor in uncertain waters. He shared not only his regrets but also his hard-won wisdom, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it head-on. Together, they embarked on a journey of mutual understanding and support. Each step forward was a victory over the past, a triumph over the fears that once controlled them. When James faltered, Lila's laughter and optimism buoyed him. When Lila doubted herself, James's steady encouragement gave her strength. Their bond deepened with every challenge they faced. Whether it was a setback, a difficult conversation, or a moment of self-doubt, they faced it side by side. Fear, which had once isolated them, now became something they confronted together. It no longer held power over them but instead became a shared challenge that strengthened their connection. This transformation was not instantaneous or easy. There were days when the past threatened to overwhelm James again, when Lila's youthful hope wavered under pressure. But their commitment to each other, rooted in honesty and empathy, created a safe space where healing could grow. As time passed, James rediscovered a joy he thought was lost forever. Simple pleasures returned, the satisfaction of small successes, the comfort of meaningful relationships, the thrill of dreaming again. Lila's light reminded him that life could be beautiful, even with its imperfections. For Lila, James's presence brought a new kind of courage. She learned that strength isn't about never feeling afraid, it's about reaching out for help when you need it and trusting that you're not alone. His wisdom helped her navigate her fears with grace and resilience. Together, they showed that fear does not have to be a prison. It can be a door, one that opens to growth, understanding, and connection when you have someone by your side willing to face it with you. Their story became a quiet inspiration to those around them. It wasn't a tale of grand heroics, but of everyday bravery, the bravery to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to listen deeply, and to support one another. They taught their community a timeless lesson, that healing is possible, not in isolation, but in the shared experience of empathy and friendship. In the end, Lila and James found something extraordinary, a bond forged through courage and compassion, a partnership that lifted them beyond their fears and into a future filled with hope. Their journey was proof that sometimes, the greatest strength lies in simply choosing to face life's challenges together. In the quiet corners of a bustling city, two souls, James and Lila, found themselves drawn together by an invisible thread woven from shared struggles and silent longing for something more. Their friendship was unexpected, almost improbable, yet it became the lifeline neither of them knew they desperately needed. James, once a man closed off and burdened by the weight of his past disappointments, carried within him a hardened shell crafted from years of guarding against pain. His world was small, filled with careful routines and walls designed to keep others at bay, fearful that opening up would only lead to more hurt. Meanwhile, Lila's life was marked by hardship and resilience born from necessity. She had learned to face each day with quiet strength, navigating the challenges that came with limited resources and broken dreams. She rarely allowed herself to show vulnerability, believing that strength meant standing alone, bearing burdens in silence. But when their paths crossed, something shifted, something tender, fragile, and powerful enough to begin breaking down the barriers around them both. At first, their friendship was tentative, a series of hesitant exchanges and cautious smiles. James found himself watching Lila with a new curiosity, struck by the way she carried herself despite the heaviness in her eyes. Lila, in turn, sensed in James a loneliness she recognized all too well, a loneliness masked by a stoic exterior. Their conversations started small comments about the weather, shared laughter over a clumsy joke, but gradually grew into something deeper. They began to talk about their fears, their hopes, and the wounds life had left open. With each shared story, James felt his walls soften just a little more. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to admit that hope felt distant but not impossible. Lila, too, found a surprising strength in opening her heart. She realized that resilience was not about enduring pain alone, but about inviting others in, trusting that kindness could be a balm for even the most stubborn scars. Their friendship became a mirror reflecting not only their struggles but also their capacity for growth and change. James, once skeptical of connection, discovered that hope could be rekindled through genuine human warmth and understanding. It was in the way Lila listened without judgment, how she offered comfort with a simple touch or a quiet word. She showed him that opening up was not a sign of weakness but a courageous step toward healing. Likewise, Lila learned from James that empathy and patience could transform even the darkest moments. Through his gentle support, she found the courage to face her challenges with renewed determination and a softer heart. Together, they nurtured a bond that transcended their differences and backgrounds, a friendship rooted in acceptance and the shared understanding that life's trials were easier to bear when faced together. Their transformation was not without setbacks. There were moments when old fears crept back in, when James retreated into silence, afraid to burden others, or when Lila's past threatened to overwhelm her. But in those times, their friendship proved its resilience. They reminded each other that healing is not a straight path but a journey marked by stumbles and recoveries. They celebrated small victories, a laugh shared despite tears, a moment of trust after years of suspicion, a gesture of kindness when the world seemed harsh and indifferent. Each step forward deepened their connection and strengthened their resolve to face life's uncertainties with hope rather than fear. Through their friendship, James and Lila discovered a truth that had eluded them for so long: that true strength does not come from isolation or self-reliance, but from the courage to open one's heart and allow kindness to flow both ways. They showed that resilience and empathy are intertwined, each feeding the other in a cycle of growth that transforms pain into purpose. Their bond became a quiet revolution against the loneliness that had defined so much of their lives, a beacon of what is possible when two people choose to see and support each other without conditions. In the days that followed, their friendship rippled out into the world around them. James found himself volunteering at the local community center, inspired by Lila's unwavering commitment to helping others despite her own hardships. Lila, encouraged by James' newfound hope, pursued opportunities she had long believed were beyond her reach, enrolling in classes, reconnecting with old friends, and dreaming again. Together, they became a testament to the transformative power of human connection, living proof that kindness and understanding can create new beginnings even in the harshest of circumstances. As they walked through the city streets, side by side, their laughter mingled with the sounds of life around them. They no longer carried the weight of their pasts alone but shared it, lightening the load and making space for joy and possibility. In each other's eyes, they saw reflections of resilience and hope, reminders that no one is truly alone when friendship offers a hand to hold. Their story was one of transformation, not just of two individuals but of the profound magic that happens when kindness meets courage, and two hearts open to the promise of change. In the end, James and Lila showed the world that strength lies not in standing apart but in standing together. Their friendship was a living testament to the belief that no matter where you come from or what you've endured, connection and compassion have the power to heal, inspire, and transform lives in the most beautiful ways imaginable. James and Lila walked side by side through the vibrant garden, their footsteps soft against the earth, surrounded by a world bursting with life and possibility. The garden was more than just a patch of greenery, it was a living symbol of growth, renewal, and the quiet power of hope. Each flower blooming, every leaf unfurling, told a story of perseverance and transformation, reminders that even the smallest seed, when nurtured with care and patience, can grow into something magnificent. For James, this garden was a mirror of his own journey, a reflection of the new life he was beginning to embrace with open arms and a hopeful heart. Not long ago, James had felt lost, weighed down by despair and the harsh realities of his circumstances. His future seemed uncertain, shadowed by the challenges that life had placed in his path. But then came Lila, a little girl with an indomitable spirit and a refusal to be ignored. She was small in stature but enormous in courage, her voice clear and unwavering even when others overlooked her. Through her quiet determination, she showed James a profound truth: sometimes, it is the smallest acts of bravery, kindness, and hope that have the power to change the biggest lives. Lila's presence in James's world was like a gentle sunbeam breaking through the clouds. She reminded him that every person, no matter how seemingly insignificant, carries within them the potential to inspire and transform. Her resilience became a beacon of light, guiding James out of the darkness and into a space where he could begin to dream again. Her belief in herself and her refusal to be silenced planted a seed of hope in his heart, one that grew steadily, nurtured by the simple acts of kindness and attention that he, too, started to offer and receive. As they strolled through the garden, James reflected on the profound journey that had brought him to this moment. He realized that hope is not a grand, sweeping gesture but often the accumulation of many small, tender moments where someone listens, where someone cares, where someone refuses to turn away. Like the garden around them, hope requires patience and care. It needs to be tended gently, watered with compassion, and shielded from the harsh winds of doubt and fear. James understood now that the future he once thought out of reach was something he could cultivate, day by day, with intention and love. Lila's influence extended beyond just James. Her example touched everyone around her, inspiring them to look deeper, to see those who might otherwise be overlooked or forgotten. She taught them that every voice matters, every life is valuable, and that sometimes, the most powerful change begins with the smallest spark. The garden they walked through was a metaphor for this truth, a place where every tiny seedling, no matter how fragile, had the potential to blossom into something strong and beautiful. In that same way, Lila's spirit encouraged a community to grow in empathy and understanding, breaking down barriers built by indifference and silence. For James, the garden was now a sanctuary, a place where he could envision a future filled with promise. He embraced this new chapter of his life with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by the courage of a child who refused to accept being invisible. He recognized that the journey ahead would still have challenges, but armed with hope and compassion, he felt ready to face them. His transformation was a testament to the enduring power of kindness and attention, the knowledge that by simply acknowledging another's struggle, we can ignite a chain reaction of healing and change. As they continued to walk, James and Lila shared a quiet understanding, a bond forged through shared experience and mutual respect. The garden, with its serene beauty and quiet strength, seemed to echo their unspoken promise, that hope, once planted, must be nurtured, protected, and allowed to flourish. It was a promise not only to themselves but to everyone who might find themselves lost in the shadows, waiting for a light to guide them home. This story closes on a hopeful note, one that lingers in the heart long after the last page is turned or the final scene fades away. It reminds us that life's biggest changes often begin with the smallest acts, an act of courage, a gesture of kindness, a moment of recognition. Through James and Lila's journey, we see that hope is not a distant dream but something accessible and real, residing in every one of us, waiting to be awakened by attention and care. The garden stands as a powerful symbol in this narrative, not just of natural growth but of human potential. It teaches us that growth is not always visible at first. Sometimes, it happens quietly beneath the surface, invisible to the eye but vital and alive. Just as the gardener trusts in the unseen roots to strengthen and expand, so too must we trust in the quiet acts of love and hope that shape our lives and the lives of those around us. Ultimately, the story is a celebration of resilience and the transformative power of human connection. It challenges us to look beyond what is easy or comfortable, to recognize the struggles of those who may seem small or insignificant, and to believe in the capacity of every person to inspire change. It calls on us to be gardeners of hope in our own communities, tending to the seeds of kindness and courage wherever they may be found. Through James and Lila, we are reminded that the future is not predetermined but shaped by the choices we make today. Their journey is a testament to the truth that sometimes, the smallest acts can indeed change the biggest lives, planting seeds of hope that blossom into a brighter, more compassionate world for us all.